Let's get oral. Let's get oral. Hey, hi. You ready to talk about, I've been salivating over this all week. Are you ready to talk about saliva?
Yes. I've been drooling out of excitement.
Woo! It's Saliva Show.
Yes.
Let's get oral. All right, how do we start this then?
Well, there's a couple ways, but I think I would love to share an anecdote about how my relationship with saliva and spit has evolved over the years. And for you all who don't know, I spent the bulk of my PhD work focusing on how fungi and bacteria in the oral microbiome interact and communicate with each other. And in order to perform a lot of the experiments looking into those relationships, I spent a good portion of my grad school years essentially collecting saliva from my peers and studying their spit. So to do, like any great scientist, while, wanted to be methodical and removing bias and other variables from pulling, I definitely was intentional about how random that process was, which would naturally introduce some variability. But to reduce that variability, I always pooled the saliva.
Oh.
So I would literally be walking around campus at times with like half a gallon of spit.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I just happen to know how vile that is. I have a viscosity problem, so the thickness of saliva can really get to me, and we've both worked at the same bench together, so I definitely let you guys collect all the saliva for us because I can't. I have a very difficult time with this, but. So how do you remove the variability other than pooling? Like there's so many solids.
Solids,
and aggregate. There's so many things going on in the saliva. What is it for?
Right. And as interested as I was in a lot of those macromolecules and components, I would ultimately filter sterilize, in different stages and graduation of pore or micron size to not just make it sterile, but to also help reduce the variability introduced by the abundance and concentration of those macromolecules. Because I was primarily interested in both the lubricating and surface adhesive qualities of the key salivary fluid and oral fluid components that most of us are familiar with when we touch our teeth or the soft tissues along our teeth and palate when we do have saliva present.
Did you become a saliva connoisseur? Could you tell who was going to give you a good pot of saliva?
That's a great question. Depending on how we want to qualify what good saliva is like. For me at the time, I was definitely intrigued by those who I knew were vegetarian or primarily had a high plant fiber diet. They're usually, I get bias and whatnot. I do feel like they tend to have less offensive salivas when it comes to the smell and the volatiles that would be present when I was handling that. When it's all pulled together, it's just gross.
Yes, agreed. I agree. 150%. So let's just review what is so great about saliva now that I'm thoroughly revolted in having lots of memories about a lot of saliva samples in my purview. I personally didn't deal in saliva because I preferred to look at host pathogen relationships. And when you do that, you are really trying to narrow down the view. So saliva gets real messy, but I did have to deal with it occasionally. But it is full of really great stuff if you can get past the viscosity, which is my issue.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a good place to segue into, I think the first question many people, might think they know, but we don't really give much thought to. So, Camille, what is saliva? What is spit?
Well, gosh, there's so much going on in there. I'm just going to go right into the weeds and say, like, that's where all of the conversation is being held. The saliva contains, lubricants that help get all of these communication factors throughout your mouth. So your microbiome's communicating and secreting all sorts of chemical signals. Your tissues are secreting all these signaling chemicals. And then you introduce food, hormones. There's just so much happening in saliva. It's like an ocean of life happening. And so we're still learning every day how complex and interesting the saliva is. But basically, it has enzymes that we're familiar with. We have to chew our food, get the saliva going, which introduces enzymes, helps that food break down. It has all sorts of proteins. The lubricant itself helps the tastants in your food travel to your taste receptors. And depending on the type of food, like one tidbit that I found fascinating was if you have milk with low fat versus high fat content, the high fat will taste less acidic just because those fat molecules will not allow you to taste the full acidity because they literally abrupt your ability to taste it, because the little tiny fat micelles that are floating around in that milk are big enough to space the acid molecules around your taste receptors such that you can't taste all of them.
Wow.
So if you don't like the acidity of milk, get cream.
That's fascinating. Like what an outcome. I would have never fathomed that such micelles in cow's milk would be enough to alter the taste or the perception of sour/acidity.
Yeah. And that's like a whole arm of food science, is understanding the physiological properties of a food component so that you can tweak the flavor, understanding some of the physiology. So there's a whole arm of research in there. And one of my friends who does big ag research, and consulting, she gave me what I have come to refer to as the cow spit paper.
Cow spit
paper. Yeah. So what it basically said, it was a review paper showing that grass-fed cows have higher quality meat, mainly due to chewing more and providing more saliva. And the mechanism by which this happens is the amount of saliva that's delivered into the ruminant belly provides an optimal pH for that ruminant organism to initiate lipolysis of the food, so less fatty deposits end up in the meat. And so I combed through the literature, because I know we don't really do like people quality of meat research, but there is a fitness element to that I can appreciate. I think we can all appreciate. I would like less fat in my tissue. Anyway, so I was looking at these like mastication papers and trying to figure out if there was a benefit of chewing more. And there was a paper that I found that the rate of this alpha amylase secretion was influenced by mastication in accord with digestive function. So more secretion was induced by food rather than non-food stimuli. So they would have somebody chew on paraffin, which isn't a food, versus bread or celery. And the more amylase secretion that was induced, it means you break down that food more efficiently, you create the optimal pH, etc. And you could create more with bread than you could with celery. And larger pieces of bread were more effective than smaller pieces of bread. So chewing is of benefit. So it's true that if you chew more, you are more efficient with your digestive process. But I don't know that it gives you a higher quality tissue, which I'd love to see some sectioning after some grass-fed humans study.
Fascinating. Well, as a fast eater who inhales their food,
Same.
I will probably get a poor chew score and have relatively lower amylase.
Well, I'll even throw my food in a blender and just drink it. So I don't know what I have to say about this. Like, so would I have to get saliva samples to drink with that shake to really make it effective? I just made myself vomit. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I mean,
Anyway.
this is a group effort, and I hope our audience members, those listening,
Saliva is really pure gold. I swear it. But I'm being ridiculous. Okay, so there's other thing. There's digestive enzymes that we talked about. There's a buffering capacity. So you have bicarbonate in your saliva that helps to buffer your saliva, which is great. You have calcium, which helps to remineralize your teeth. We have antimicrobial peptides that are secreted by our cells, which I find a hot button topic. I helped write a review on them, but I will say this. They aren't expressed to the level that we know of them as antimicrobial peptides or proteins. And so it's thought that either they have other biological functions, which have been described, or that they localize in a concentration effective enough to keep the microbes at bay. And so none of that is really known for sure, but they are called antimicrobial peptides. And then, more mucins that help with your digestion, lubrication, the pellicle formation on your tooth surface, and, water for the mucosal integrity. All of this helps the mouth function properly, and people who have low salivary production really do suffer. They don't taste food as well. They have a hard time swallowing. There's a host of other issues. They get ulcers. They can have a lot of different issues, but mainly when we think of oral health, we think of low salivary rate leading to more cavities. And in fact, one paper I was reading about saliva, if you have an active cavity, you tend to salivate more. So some people that are experiencing hypersalivation issue are often dealing with several active cavities, which I thought was interesting.
Wow. That is fascinating. My assumptions has been, someone that has a higher number of cavities or caries, in more severe cases, I would think a certain percentage of those people just do not produce as much saliva as others. But the fact that if they are actively experiencing activity, there's more salivary flow or saliva present, that almost seems counterintuitive.
Right. I thought that was pretty cool that your mouth knows. It can sense when you need some more saliva. And so saliva helps to control the pH, to create an optimal pH. Also, it contains, it can contain arginine, and your microbiota has an arginine deamylase system that helps to break down that arginine and help to buffer the pH. So if you don't have enough arginine in your diet and you don't have the right microbiota to provide that arginine breakdown system, you can have more cavities because those bacteria are providing a balance to the acidic profile of bacteria. So, which is why arginine has been explored as a oral health benefit. So, very interesting. I will go on about some of the arginine nitric oxide, but I'm going to hold that discussion for later on. What else? Do you know anything else about saliva that we should know about?
Oh, goodness. Where to begin? Well, I think you did well when it comes to highlighting a lot its composition and really its complexity. That's really one of the big things I want to convey and dive into in this episode with you, because you're right. I don't think we have near as much of an appreciation for how the various enzymes and mucins, the role of electrolytes, the role the microbiota plays, and the role our immune cells and our immune system plays in that fluid when it comes to surveillance.
Right, the whole IgA.
Right, and to link back to even our previous episode when we were talking about taste and taste receptors.
Yes.
I've always been very interested in understanding more about the role saliva plays in individual perceptions and experiences to taste and flavor, because I can only imagine there's probably certain flavors that are perceived differently due to the composition of one's saliva.
Agreed.
And or maybe the volume. So this is a really nice interplay that I'm just excited to continue to learn more along this journey.
I do feel for those people who are short on saliva. It does seem like gum helps to produce any mastication scenario helps, but some of the topicals are really just transient benefits. But I know that Sjogren's is a challenging one because it's basically an autoimmune disorder of the salivary gland, and it prevents, basically leads to excessive dry mouth. But they can have a host of other different pathologies that do seem to indicate that the saliva and oral composition is really regulating other parts of your immune system. And so I'm just deeply fascinated by those pieces. Nothing is conclusive. Not everybody with Sjogren's exhibits all the qualities that have been put forward, but certainly there are some. I'm very interested in how the oral cavity can help your immune system kind of dictate how you're going to respond to a pathogen that comes in. And so depending on your state of oral health, you can have different outcomes depending on how you're exposed to a pathogen. And in Sjogren's, some of those attributes are blunted. And I do wonder if it's simply just the reduction of saliva or if it's specific composition that leads to some of those issues. So I think there's so much to know there. And then you said it yourself, the whole microbiome, we're still learning so much about the chemicals that they're producing in response to us, and how they're kind of this ongoing discussion between ourselves and them. And we still have just barely scratched the surface. So pour some saliva on that.
Absolutely. But I will say one thing that's helped grease the rails of progress for salivary research is the role and emergence of salivary and spit test.
Yeah, who doesn't want to spit on a
spit on a stick?
A stick, yes. And get an outcome, get a readout. Tell me what's happening in my mouth and my body. Tell me everything.
Absolutely. There's this space of, and specifically salivary diagnostics and using saliva as the source for doing diagnoses is very exciting. And I think if there is, before going into the background and state to state, I just want to highlight, I think, at a moment in recent history that has really accelerated its prominence is SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to bring that up at the beginning because up until then, there has been no FDA-approved salivary diagnostic in the market. But because of COVID, there have been now several devices that have received emergency use authorization from the FDA. And so I'm hoping, not that, like, as bad as COVID and the pandemic has been, I'm hopeful that the knowledge that's been gathered from being able to introduce these diagnostics into the wild and have them accessible and available will hopefully accelerate the emergence and acceptance of these tools for not just oral health, but like really all clinicians and anyone interested in being able to have a better understanding of their oral and whole health physiology.
So I love that you brought up COVID, because that gives me a way to talk about what is an acute infection and what is a diagnostic for health measures. They're very two different things. So one of them is I have an active infection. I have COVID. The other is what's my CRP level today? Or do I have Porphyromonas gingivalis rolling around in my mouth? And do I care? Should I care? And how we have been grappling with salivary diagnostics for quite a long time, really wishing that we could nail down a yes or no. Yes, I have Porphyromonas gingivalis in my mouth. So what? What do I do about that? Or my CRP is a 9 out of, 15. Is that bad, or is that okay? And
exactly.
So why have we not had any diagnostics in this space so far? I know the answer, but I want you to tell me.
Well, I think getting back to one reason why is, for better or worse, the complexity of saliva as a biofluid in and of itself. The variability that is experienced from person to person and their respective composition and or volume and availability and what that looks like throughout the time of day and also throughout the time of their life. There's no uniformity to it, quite frankly. So just the fact that there is no established foundation or rubric to work off for choosing for being able to understand specificity and sensitivity has presented some major challenges for the salivary diagnostic space. With all of that said, due to especially the emergence of not only like genomics, but computer science and bioengineering, and knowing what we know about the biochemistry of our mouth and saliva, the last 20 years have been very, very promising to showing the scope of salivary diagnostics by addressing some of these challenges, especially when it comes to sensitivity and specificity as we learn more about the nature of the biomarkers and their associations to oral and systemic disease. And I think just over time, as we become more knowledgeable of disease-specific biomarkers, the applications will become that much more powerful.
Yeah, I think the person-to-person variability is the wild card in the mix. I think that we are getting kind of a better vista of everything, but understanding that circadian rhythms are at play and really ever present, influencing our inflammatory profiles throughout the day, and influencing our microbiota at different times, and then having night shift workers versus day shift. And, there's a lot going on to kind of disrupt some of those patterns, or people that just don't sleep very well. And you can see their patterns of expression in their saliva can be drastically altered. So there were studies taking people who were night shift people and day shift, and then switching them back, and watching some of these markers as they peak and valley at different times, depending on how that person was exposed to day or night. And it can be really convoluted if we're asking yes/no questions to our health. So I'm looking forward to, simplifying the mess and trying to maybe do smart big data to get around some of these hurdles.
Absolutely. That big data term, right?
Yeah.
Getting thrown out there, but it is a key component to, again, the emergence and ultimate success of salivary diagnostics in the future.
Yeah, I was doing panels of cytokines and showing what peaked and dipped during experimental gingivitis, for example, and trying to play with those values to really dial down the noise or the interperson variability. And it was super challenging. I needed maybe a team of stats to really blow through some of that work. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential. I'm eager to see it play out now that we have some of these big data tools to work with.
Absolutely. It's also very encouraging of seeing that there has been an increase in funding opportunities, both from private and government/public supported institutions in this space. And some of these research efforts are focused on, outside of COVID, there's studies and efforts to utilize diagnostics to be able to measure oral cancer.
Yes.
Especially biosignals coming from HPV related diseases. There's investigations going on of being able to have a salivary implant to be able to measure melatonin levels over time in people that suffer from a spectrum of sleep disorders. And then there's also other viral and infectious diseases where you could use these diagnostics to measure, say, anti-HIV antibodies or Zika virus material. And that could be a rapid test. And again, I think these are all potentially exciting and useful opportunities for introducing a tool to be able to have a better understanding of where someone stands in health and disease.
Are there any that are looking like close to market ready?
That is to be determined. If there was one space, I think what's probably the one that many people are excited for is this periodontal space. What do you think?
I get I get suspicious around people being curious about periodontal disease because historically, and I'll speak to this from personally trying to inquire on the subject, people don't seem to really understand the level of disease that they might have. You go to your doctor or your dentist and they're, reading out these pocket depths and they say 3, 4, 5, whatever. And they say you should brush more. And not until you require deep cleaning or they send you to the periodontist do you think, oh no, I have a problem. They just keep yelling at you and you're like, yeah, I know I should brush. Yeah, more. Yep. I brush twice a day. That should be good. Right. So just having queried people historically, if you ask them if they have, when they go to the dentist, if they have bleeding on probing, almost 90% of them will reply yes, because so many people have active inflammation. But when you ask them if they have gingivitis or perio, they say no. But by definition, if they have bleeding on probing, they definitely have gingivitis. They might be progressing to perio. And I think there's a real disconnect. I think that, practitioners, us health-focused people would like to have a diagnostic in this space that's definitive and helpful for early intervention and having some deeper discussions with our patients. But I also think that there's a disconnect on, like, what does inflammation mean in your mouth? And how can we make it more maybe not dramatic, but more like holistically meaningful and impactful so that the patient knows what to do about it and knows why they want to do more. So I'm skeptical. I think that people would be really quick to grab, like, what's my heart health for today? I have my Apple Watch telling me it's all right, but what's my CRP level? I feel like that's, even athletes could get behind some of those measurements. And if they could just spit on something to give them a look-see for the day, I think that would be really appealing. But I don't think anybody's going to spit on a piece of paper every day just to see if they have perio.
Well, you wouldn't spit on a stick every week.
Okay, but I did, and I'll tell you about it in a few minutes. But I maybe did like 10 times in 3 days.
Nice.
But I'll let some tension remain there, and you can tell us what else we might see in the pipeline for our diagnostics.
Absolutely. I think you really broke that down elegantly in terms of the unlikelihood of being able to have a meaningful diagnostic when it comes to saying a yes or no on perio, when there's more work to do to decoupling the stage and relevance of inflammation and how other outcomes linked that's usually experienced chairside play into making that clinical observation and then subsequent decision of care after the fact. Beyond, while perio is education, I do think being able to assess and monitor or surveillance inflammatory signals over time does have value. While Absolutely. It might not explicitly tell us, like, hey, like, yes, you have like blank disease or whatnot, I think it still can give a useful snapshot of where one might be on a scale of trending away or towards a certain disease outcome, especially if there's history in their family or in their own life due to previous experiences.
Yeah.
And then I think outside of the inflammatory space, well, no, I wouldn't say this one's necessarily outside, but getting outside of the mouth in terms of oral health, being able to use salivary diagnostic to measure small metabolites linked to our circulatory health, maybe.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I
think a lot of people will be interested in that.
Absolutely. I think that has huge potential and wide acceptance if it were to be available. I also think for people, like for thinking of marketed in places that don't have like the dental infrastructure and network of certain countries and communities, I think being able to have a cheap, fast, reliable, and easy test, whether it is like a test strip or whatnot, to tell you, some qualitative and semi-quantitative information could go a long way too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in that case, having whatever you can test in saliva would be super helpful. Trying to navigate, a blood test can be really difficult in more rural spaces. So I think those would be even dental health at that point. Like all of it matters, just to get a read of where you start.
Absolutely.
One of the things that saliva can help you manage is your hunger. So ghrelin, which is a hormone, and I bring up hormones because I'm going to talk about that in diagnostics in a minute, but ghrelin is the hunger hormone. And it's been shown that if you chew gum, you can stave off the fluctuation in GLP-1, which would drive your ghrelin levels and cause hunger. So you can actually stave off hunger with chewing gum. But the GLP-1 ghrelin pathway is really important in diabetes. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of like get a meaningful diabetes readout to manage some of those hunger components and sugar fixes to kind of flatline some of those spikes and valleys that you experience when you're dealing with a diabetic state.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see something around there. And of course, everybody wants to manage their hunger. So gum's important.
Yes. Underappreciated.
But yeah, it's good for creating saliva, but it's also good for staving off hunger. All right. So I'm going to jump into this nitric oxide subject matter because we've talked about it before on the show. And I spoke about arginine being in your saliva and your oral bacteria being able to break it down and buffer against an acidic profile of bacteria. So that's all great. Nitric oxide is a gas that is broken down from nitrate in your food, nitrite. And how it gets broken down starts in the oral bacteria. So they break it down. And what nitric oxide does is it helps to vasodilate your vessels so that you have good heart health. Okay. So we have found very recently that some oral hygiene products like chlorhexidine can reduce or remove the oral bacteria responsible for breaking down that nitrite and giving you that nitric oxide that's important for vasodilation. But if you have periodontal disease, your bacteria are also creating nitric oxide in your mouth. And what this does is it's a reactive oxygen gas that helps to kill off some of these bacteria. And so if you have super high levels of nitrite in your mouth, it could be indicative of a perio situation. But if you have no nitrate in your mouth, in your saliva, this could be a deficiency of sorts. But there is a diagnostic on the market called my Fit Strip, and it will measure the prebiotic nitrite. It's just measuring nitrite in your saliva, and it also gives you the pH. And so I purchased some because I'm very intrigued about this whole pathway. So too much of the nitrite could be bad because that could be periodontal disease. Too little, I'm still on the fence as to what too little really, really means. But here, I'll give you my story. So I have fairly good oral health. I have stopped my gingivitis. I've had gingivitis ever since I was little. It just seemed to be hereditary. And I've done enough to stop and mitigate the inflammation, which is great. I feel good about myself. I don't have any active cavities, whatever. So my pH was great. And my nitrite was deficient. It was not even reading. And look, I drink kale shakes every day because, like we said on the last episode, I can't taste it, so why not? I will drink that, sure. And I exercise, I don't know, 3 to 5 times a week for sure. I usually go on the 5 side 5 times a week, but sometimes I'll be kind of sedentary. So the first day I tried this strip, I was pretty sedentary, but I had had my shake and I waited. It says to wait like a half hour past eating. I think I waited 45 minutes and no nitrate. And so later in the day, I had lunch. I think it was soup, but it was, a meaningful soup. I made it myself, vegetable broth that I made out of my own boiled vegetables. So I felt like it was pretty healthy and waited a couple hours and nothing. But my pH was fine the whole time, and that's great. So my heart health is fine, by the way. I typically run on the low side of a low BP. But more recently, I've been closer to normal or a little on the high side of normal because I am, I guess, getting older. So anyway, so I tested myself, I think 3 times on the first day, and all the times I was considered deficient by the My Fit Strip indications. Okay. So the next day I had my shake. I worked out. I sat around, did my work. And then I had lunch and I had virtually forgot to test myself. And then after lunch, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to test myself. And so it was 2 hours after I ate and my nitrite was buzzing. It was totally in the normal range, perfectly pink according to their standards. And I tested later on that day and it remained pretty normal. And so I started thinking, okay, so I am an N of 1 and I have my own intravariability. So what are the kinetics of nitric oxide or nitrite in the saliva? And so I went on this, I looked at the data that the MyFit strip had. A lot of those data are, other people's published work, which is great. But a lot of them are actually using blood samples or serum samples to look at the nitrate and nitric oxide. And so I ended up falling over this one paper that showed sedentary expression in saliva versus exercise. And sure enough, the sedentary folks were very low and the freshly exercised were very high. And so I think that perhaps it's maybe not a true measure unless you remain active just to see what your profile will be. But it caused me to have a lot more questions than answers. And here's something that's on the mind. I mean, it's not a diagnostic. It's just telling you, this one component along with your pH. But I was curious and wanted to know about me and my health. And considering all of my health factors, nothing alarming, nothing out of the ordinary, pretty standard fare. I'm a normal height, weight person. Everything's very normal. Not too skinny, definitely not too skinny, not too fat. I'm fine. So I was a little disappointed that I couldn't have the same read all day on everything. And so take it for what you will, but I feel like it has to be combined with a few other things. Like I have to know my health metrics, not to freak out that I'm nitrite deficient.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Do you think, if it wasn't one test strip, let's say you had 3, but each strip tested its own collection of biomarkers or signals, do you think that could enhance or improve?
Well, right. So I brought up CRP several times, but I mean, if nitrite in your saliva is potentially related to your heart health, and well, now I want to know all the other heart health of things that I could possibly know.
Yeah, so you got to have your Fitbit or smartwatch on top of
right, right,
and everything else.
You need all of these readers coming into one system to really give you the best output. So again, I don't know that we're at a point of salivary diagnostic that I feel amazing with. Even our COVID tests seem to be a little delayed. The last time I had COVID, I feel like I took the test 3 times before I popped positive. And so I understand the reasons for that, but it can be frustrating, especially with something like COVID where you don't want to share too much, right?
Absolutely.
Anyway, I do happen to know somebody who has been working on an inflammation assay for a long time. And I've been following his work for most of my oral health career. He's an incredible scientist, and it looks like he is going to get FDA approval for this inflammation chairside oral test, and it's using your spit. So we're going to have him on our next episode of Let's Get Oral. So I think that's where I'm going to leave this episode.
I love it. I think this was a fun and exciting episode, and I look forward to the ongoing, as I'd like to call it, saliva series or the spit series. We can come up with a fancier name later on, but this is definitely one of the paths I'm really excited to just share more with the world, but also myself just learn more about personally and at large for how we can just better leverage and appreciate this slimy liquid.
Well, thanks for covering all things saliva with me. We'll definitely explore more into this magical goo. Hopefully never from a 50 ml conical ever again. But
never again. Podcast only.
Let's just talk about it. All right. Well, until next time when we talk to Dr. Glogauer about his inflammation assay, which I'm excited for, because that is a definitive, and I'm thrilled.
Me too. Until then, this is always a pleasure, Camille. For everyone listening, I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and keep smiling.
Let's get oral. Indeed.
Was that too corny?
Let's get oral.
Hey there, listener. If you made it this far, we want to genuinely thank you for listening to Let's Get Oral and giving us a chance. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite streaming platform, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else, and please share this widely with your friends, family, and coworkers. And if you haven't listened to our previous episodes, we highly recommend you check some of those in our catalog, such as the one we most recently published with Dr. Jonathan focus on the role aging and oral health play with each other. Until next time, keep smiling.